It's great to have back on the show App State assistant coach Mark Cascio. Coach, thanks for coming back on the show.
And I love being here. Love talking
Yeah,
hoops with you.
yeah, always a good time. Appreciate Coach being willing to do this. Sometimes at a moment's notice. Sometimes it's just our excuse to get back together over the internet and talk about basketball. If coaches are like me, they're probably starting to think a little bit more specific in regards to like the start of the season and practice planning and everything that goes along with all of that. And, because how things are for you guys at the Division I level, kind of already started that, and maybe several weeks, maybe even for some, like several months ahead in that planning process. Let me start like big picture and ask you this. What is the process for how you all are going to go about like introducing, starting to walk through offensive and defensive systems, and even in regards to like culture and how you go about doing stuff? I even had a conversation today with our players, like completely non-basketball related, but trying to lay the groundwork early. I found like in my coaching, it seems like you have these conversations earlier and earlier every year, whether that's to like, cut things off at the nose early, or just kind of just to make sure like this is how we're going to be as a program. Maybe when do you guys have that talk or those kinds of talks amongst yourselves and your team? And like, what do those look like? And what are the thoughts that you have in regards to like, this is the kind of stuff that I would encourage coaches to think about as they lay things out, especially here early on.
Yeah. So I think that starts at the end of your previous season. So right after most of us lose our last game. I think when it's fresh, there's a lot of value in meeting as a staff, unpacking things. I think after the season, you're much less emotional. You're not tied into it. The season is the season, good or bad. So love meeting with the staff there. I would usually, as a head coach, I would give them a questionnaire just as a primer to guide the conversation, and then love getting players' perspective when it's fresh, especially from the seniors, because they tend to be a little bit more honest. They've kind of gone through the whole deal from start to finish. They can give you really good insight there. So I think that conversation starts immediately. At the high school level, you kind of know what you have coming up. And then at the college level, I wish we knew what we had coming up, but with the transfer portal, it's can be difficult, but we usually have a pretty good gauge of where we're going to be. Like for us, next year's team, we're going to be, we're not going to have quite as many newcomers. So we'll have some returners, more so than the previous year, but we're going to be smaller. So what does that change tactically? What are we going to do differently on both sides of the ball? We just kick around ideas. It could be pretty informal as we come up with, different ways we can tackle offense, defense, things like that. And then as far as the summer goes, we're able to work with our players for a certain amount of weeks. We were very, very skill based. We don't, and I made this mistake too earlier in my career where we tried to squeeze every minute in and get a head start. And I'm a huge proponent in doing things right, but I want practice one to feel like practice one. So we're being really intentional right now with just a lot of skill development stuff in an individual or like a really small group setting, maybe 1, 2, 3 players in there. And a lot of that, is given the constraints like class schedules. So we have position groups. So we have every assistant coach is in charge of 5 players because we have a 15-player roster. So I will work out our 5 kids, my 5 kids, depending on their class schedule. That's more, where we can really spend time on their game, going deep into their strengths, helping them with their weaknesses. And you can blend some team concepts there. One thing that we've done a really good job of this year is being on the same page. So just constant feedback to each other and say, hey, look, like we're like this team concept this week. So let's hit on it in our individual groups. That's gone a long way for us. And I think the players, they appreciate that consistency where then when you get in a team practice, we're all saying the same things. We've all had the reps. And along those lines, I can't emphasize saying the same things, the terminology piece. I think that's something a good off-season project for coaches is clarify things. There's a million ways to describe things. Like if we're talking, like we're using the term tagging the sideline for our wings to run and transition. So that the fact that they're hearing tag the sideline, one thing our head coach wanted us to clean up our outlets. So 1 minute of our individual skill session is just a ball goes to the net. Let's make sure that we're outletting this way, or let's getting our back to the sideline, and we're all doing that. So that really helps from that standpoint. As far as like a team wide thing, we're practicing 1 day a week, so that's our team practice, and then we're doing split groups as well. So in our 5 days, they get 2 individuals, a split group workout, and then a team practice. So I think we're doing a good job of focusing on them right now and not practicing too much, knowing that they're in the weight room, they're doing conditioning, and then they got to go to class.
Do you have the practice when it starts? What's your start date?
We're allowed to start September 26th is when we move to 20 hours.
Okay. Is that already set as to what you want to be teaching, introducing, etc.? Like, is it very specific, or is there some flexibility to it based off of what you feel like you're accomplishing in the next several weeks for the course of just those 8 hours that you have them?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I've always, I think all great systems begin with the end in mind. And I look at it more of, what do we have right now? We basically from now, from the start of classes to September 26th, we had 5 weeks. Week 1 of class, it's just kind of, very flexible. We want the players to kind of get adjusted to class. And then there's always that add drop where schedules may change. So really we look at it as a 4-week block before, between now and start of practice. So we came up with a 4-week plan of what we wanted to accomplish. And I think this changes for everybody, depending on just your staff, where you are in your program, and then what you have returning. For us, we want to make sure that we're building our transition, because we like to play with pace. We're learning how to space the floor, and everything else is skill development. And when we talk skills, a lot of that is 0.5, shoot it, drive it, or move it. So everything is kind of pulling in that direction. And, we're big on 2-way teaching. So we will hit some defense. We'll get some team concepts in there. But we have a 4-week plan, but it's not dire that we hit all that stuff. That just really acts as a guide for us as we move through. Like even today, my voice is because we had a split group practice. So we had a group come in for a 50-minute workout, and then another group come in for a 50-minute workout. One group kind of transferred things better than the other group did. So we kind of had a plan penciled in for Thursday's practice. We're probably going to scale that back. So I think being flexible, not putting pressure on yourself, and just knowing that we have a plan, like a logical flow to it, and we're going to get as far as we can. I think it's important that we don't try to move too fast. I think the tendency for coaches is install. And I just think if you're developing players, like if you don't do it now, it's going to be very hard to start doing it in season. You should always be developing your players, but like I said, we don't want it to feel like team practice now. I think that's a mistake that we've probably all made in the past.
Yeah, that's good. I saw the other day somebody post about the terminology piece, encouraging coaches to like sit down and write out their terminology. And it's provided some clarity for us. And it's also like forced us to maybe put some terminology to some things that we didn't necessarily have within just the common vernacular that we use with our players. And that aids to another. I feel like it's another practical way, very practical way for you to play faster, is when you have that terminology. Coach faster, play faster has helped with the flow of the pace of our offense. and has been a good exercise for us. So yeah, really good point. And let me expand that then out to past these 4 weeks, and then as practice starts, do you all have benchmarks then as this season goes, and not necessarily like wins and losses? I know some coaches sit down and they project, should win, not should win, and I'm not really talking wins and losses. I'm talking more so of like you want to have installed, for instance, like a zone by this point or whatever. Do you have that, and what does that look like, maybe offensively and defensively?
So yes, we do. That's not something that we've fully like put together yet. What I have is a full like installation guide of everything that we would run or have to install this season. But man, it's so fluid. Like I've seen other coaches that have the season laid out. Like October 15th, we're putting in our press. October 17th. I can't do that. It's just, it's not my brain does not work like that. But I do think the way my brain works and the way it just makes sense to me is have everything in front of you and know a logical flow to that. So for instance, like right now, like let's say we were starting practice, we're running a drive in space offense. If we can't space the floor, we can't run drive in space. So I know that we have to check that box before we do the other things. And I know being able to space the floor means it's got to contain X, Y, and Z. So we got to be able to space it with player movement, how we're going to cut. When the ball is dribbled, how do we space the floor? And honestly, those are things that we're tackling now. But I just have that logical flow, especially like offensively, defensively, those systems. I think where the gray area comes in is like, well, when do we install our under out of bounds play? Like to me, I always, if we're running the same thing we did last year, it becomes a lot easier. I always look for like a catalyst to install something where if we're going to put in a zone, like we have our schedule. And historically, maybe our second, third opponent plays a 2-3 zone, and we're going to play a 2-3 zone this year. So let's put it in before that game. Let's sprinkle it in, or things like that. And then that way, as you go, you kind of check off. And when you add, like maybe something becomes priority, like we're going to play a pressing team, or we're going to start working on practice one, which means something else might take a back seat. But I think an area I've grown as a coach is kind of goes with, I guess, playing conceptually, but just if we're going to play against something that we don't like, well, let's incorporate it into what we do. And like, even if like we were never a huge pressing team, we might pick up full court man, but our goal was never to like turn you over for 32 or 40 minutes, whatever level you're at, but we're still going to install it. So we're always working on ourselves. Where, we have, like you mentioned, terminology where instead of saying like, hey, let's just pick up full court man here because we're going to see that, we would say, hey, we're in 40. That's our full court man-to-man defense, because you're always going to need it. And so I think just look for reasons to install things. But as far as the systems go, I think there's a logical flow. Like defensively, I'm a big believer is just start on the ball. So like start with on ball defense and post defense, because those are, kind of your one-on-ones. If you don't know how to guard the ball, you can't guard the rim, but you can't guard the three either because you're going to be in rotation all the time. And a lot of coaches are like, man, well, we can't compete because we don't have our system in, but your kids play basketball, they play pickup and they do okay, right? Like they can manage to get up and down the floor without having every detail in place. So we always start from the ball side, one pass away, add help, rotation. Then we go transition defense, which you move through that fairly quickly, but I think you have to understand ball side help before understanding transition defense, at least the way we teach it. And then we'll go to common actions. Which would be like your cutting, I think is the easiest way to start. Basket cuts, back cuts, move to screening, and then move to like paired actions, like maybe a stagger or flex, back screen, down screen, things like that. And what the order we install those in probably has a good idea of what our schedule looks like early.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I've found, even to your point, it's fluid a lot of times because of like who we face. So, if zone offense isn't a really big deal in the first 3 or 4 games, we don't even touch zone offense. But to your point, I've also found that like whatever is foundational to our overall system of play, that's usually what better get a lot of attention. And we have in the past, I remember even last year, like we were trying to introduce something that was taking up a lot of time, but it wasn't necessarily something that was one of those big system things, and it really hurt us early on. And now looking back on it, I'm thinking like if we would have done it, but it still required a lot of work, which was unfortunate. And so I almost feel like if you're going to be doing something, a lot of it, or introducing it early, like you better be pretty close to being married to it if you're prioritizing that much time to it. And
Yeah.
that was a mistake that we made last year, but
Well,
we figured
one
it out
thing,
fortunately early.
yeah, one thing we did last year is we started as a man-to-man team. And then kind of like that catalyst of like, hey, we want to have a change up here. We're going to see some zone. We have some extra time over our Christmas break.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe let's put in our zone. And then once we did, we hardly played man anymore. I mean, our zone was really good. Our man wasn't, we never just found a rhythm with it. We had like a COVID break and all that stuff. So it just wasn't as good as our zone. So
Yeah.
we put it in late and stayed with it. And, this year our man and zone, our principles are going to match as far as like, cutting the floor, things like that. So it's going to be easy, I think, to install both. But I would imagine us to be primarily man to man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like for a lot of college teams, which high school teams may not have this luxury depending on how your schedule is set up, but that Christmas time is like hey, let's add in this because we have a little extra time. And
Yeah.
Unfortunately, over the last 2 years, COVID breaks have also been like last year was a really big COVID. Our sickness in January was like actually turned out to be like a real big part of like us turning and then finishing the way that we did. So yeah, sometimes the breaks are expected and sometimes they're not, but
That's
I
right.
guess blessings in disguises. Is there anything in particular you feel like you just talked about like the defense there a little bit, but do you feel like, and if you think this is like giving away any secrets, don't do that. But anything in particular you want to do earlier in the season than you did last year because you think like it will really help us based off maybe what we saw last year or what we think because of this group that we have that we should be doing earlier?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think last year was a little unique because it was my first year as an assistant at App State, and I was doing a lot with the offensive stuff, and I kind of had to go through of like what are we going to run from what I used to run and what they ran, and kind of blending those things. And honestly, like it kind of sounds like we were in the same situation last year. We kind of got to almost like, I would say, later than this point in the year. And I went to our head coach and I was like, I really think we should be running X, Y, and Z. It wasn't a wholesale change. It was just kind of adding another kind of package series to it. Coaches that are familiar probably know what I'm talking about. So we almost, this year we're just so much more buttoned up, efficient. You forget how difficult year ones are. Our head coach has been there for 8 years, but we had 2 new assistants. So it was year one for some of us. We made some changes. We had a lot of newcomers. So this year, I don't know that. I feel like we're probably just doing what we would do with a veteran group, if that makes sense.
Anything that you feel like you want to put off that like maybe you even thought was important? And you can stick to offense if you feel more comfortable with that. But like I thought this, and I think you could answer this maybe kind of uniquely because you did come from high school to college, and it could be something like this worked really well for us or whatever. And I feel like now kind of pushing that off could be helpful to our program here.
Yeah, I think nothing particular comes to mind, but I do think the difference between high school and college with the players is the players have just been around the game longer. So I think probably in high school, if like you're doing something and it's not quite right, or you haven't installed something else that fits with that. Like the high school kids honestly might not even know.
Yeah.
But in college, it's like you get to something and they're like, well, we haven't gone over that yet. And it's like, but it doesn't matter, like, right. But we're not there. That's on the not yet list. So let's just do this. And it's like, okay, where, the high schooler might not even they don't know that they don't know. So I think in a lot of ways, just the challenge as a coach at this point in the year is understanding that not everything's going to be perfect. And sometimes you're just teaching them how to practice, or sometimes you're teaching the drill and how well the drill is executed. Or like if we're teaching a drill and if the effort's not great or we're turning it over a bunch, it's probably because they're thinking about the drill, and just understanding that as a coach and just, hey, we've got from now until March to get better at this. Right now we're in the learning phase, not the performance phase. So I think things like that, just, as you go through your coaching career and journey, you just get so much more used to that. It comes a lot more natural. I know early in my career, I was probably a maniac where I would give my team 30 instructions and then expect them to do it perfect. And I have this vision of what I want it to look like in my head, and it doesn't. It's their fault. But I was just being impatient, and wasn't going through the process correctly.
Yeah, and that brings up something that was beneficial for us last year. I know you and I talk a lot about offense, but this is actually defensively. And I do think it's like an advantage of teaching out of concepts and teaching your players concepts, whether that's on the offensive side or the defensive side. Like we put a lot of time into a matchup zone and going into the regional semifinals against the host team that had already beat us once on their floor. The head coach and I, like that morning of, I had kind of been thinking of it. It's one of those things where it's kind of weird. Like we start to like think each other's thoughts type of thing, but it was really his thing. So I'll give him credit for it. But he was like, dude, what do you think about, this was like in the fitness center of the hotel. He was like, dude, what do you think about running a box and one on the all region player? And I was like, actually, I think that's a great, and we went to the shoot around that morning at like 10 o'clock and installed our box and one that we had not run literally one possession all year of, and ended up, it was effective, won the regional. Not the reason why we won it, but why we won that game. But it was something that was kind of had been put off, but we had prepared the guys. And to your point, like if you can train your players, you can come to, if you train them in concepts and understand, basic defensive philosophy in this case, then you can go and introduce something. I'm not talking about like run and jump or something like that, but something, just a minor adjustment. And if you can relate that then to like, no, you guys know how to do this already. It's just a few little adjustments. Like they bought into it, they were all in on it, and it ended up helping us win. So
yeah, and I love the way you frame that. I was going to say the same thing. Is like you almost, I hate to say sell it, because I think players will do anything you ask them to do, sure, at the end of the day. But it's, if you kind of just frame it as this isn't much different than what we already do. It's just, this is the tweak. Mm-hmm. And things like a box and one is like, I feel like the more you coach it, the worse you get at it. So
yeah,
it's almost better just like get in the box, play hard, don't let this player touch the ball. Sure. But I think, it's cool that y'all had that like same intuition. And I think as a head coach, and I know, assistant coaches too, we all have this like intuition, but I think as a head coach, they have that strong sense of like who their team is, and because they're looking at it as a different lens than us maybe. But I would say trust your gut. If something is just like weighing on you, like I really think this is the right thing to do, you probably should be doing it. Mm-hmm. And it kind of goes with our conversation of like what to install, when to install it. I think the challenge is what we want to install versus what we really need to install. Like what I think, we see all this cool stuff and it's like, well, let's do that today or let's do that tomorrow at practice, but that's not really what your team needs. So that's really the challenge.
Yeah, for sure. I saw on your schedule, I was looking at it here this afternoon. You guys actually opened with Charlotte, which I thought was cool. I actually interviewed just about 2 weeks ago, Coach Consuegra, and then Swegra, excuse me. And then I saw you go up to Ann Arbor, play up there at Michigan as well. Any kind of particular philosophy on scheduling those types of non-conference games are they preparing you for certain things within the conference? How does that kind of work as far as like preparing for the real season, which is that regular conference slate and then the conference tournament?
Yeah, I think there's a ton of factors that go into scheduling. Just some like things we try to do is stay pretty regional in our non-conference. And then, I always looked at it as like there's kind of 3 levels of teams. Level 1, you could probably show up and win. You could have some bad practices leading up. Maybe you guys aren't completely focused and it would take a lot for you to lose. There's level 2s where like, hey, this is going to be a coin flip. Like we've got to play well, but it's not like we've got to play out of our minds well to win the game. And then level 3, that's, when you're going up to Ann Arbor, Charlotte's going to be a heck of a test for us. And we're going up to West Virginia. Those are the ones where it almost brings out the best in you in a way. Like I think you learn a lot about your team or it's kind of like fight or flight. Like, are you going to show up mentally and physically? Last year we played at North Carolina and at Duke. Both teams obviously very good. At North Carolina, we didn't really show up. But exactly 1 week later, we played Duke. And that experience of playing North Carolina and then going into playing Duke, I think we actually won 3 quarters. We played quarters on the women's side. We won 3 of the 4 quarters. Just the quarter we lost, we really lost it. But just that experience, man, you learn so much about your team playing those like level 3 teams. And then like at the college level too, it's a cool experience. Like we try to, like if we have a kid from, Texas, well, we try to schedule a game in Texas for them, so that kind of goes into it. But, as far as the competition, we try to play just teams that look like our conference a little bit, that are going to be, physically a good comparison to our conference, maybe style of play. And then also I think setting up some road trips where our conference plays Thursday, Saturday. So we'll even try to get like a Thursday, Saturday road trip just so we can give our team a taste and see how difficult it is to play a Thursday, get a very limited practice Friday, and then play on Saturday. So I think, your non-conference, I think even more so at the college level than the high school level, you're trying to build experience against a variety of different teams. And I think a good mix of level 1, 2s. I think you got to have a couple level 1s on there, majority level 2s. But then, man, sometimes those level 3s are the memorable ones that like really define your season.
Last thing here, you mentioned year 2. Is there anything personally that you're planning to do different this year based off your experience from last year?
Yeah, last year it was an adjustment, but I still felt like I was providing a lot of value. Still, doing this year, I want to think more like a head coach. That's what I'm really challenging myself to do.
Hey, can you repeat that real quick?
I have a shared Google Doc. Yeah, just start from the top.
Well, just say last year and then what you just said.
Okay. So last year I felt like I was learning on the fly, just new challenges, new adventures, new players, new coaching staff. So I was learning on the fly, but still adding a lot of value, but kind of in my lane. This year, my role has changed a bit, and it really challenged me to think like a head coach again, which is awesome. It's like I'm getting the best of both worlds here. I'm an assistant coach for a Division I program, working for a head coach that does an awesome job with our players and staff. So I'm really challenging myself to think like a head coach. I have a shared Google Doc with the head coach where I just kind of think like these are probably things if I was the head coach I'd be thinking about. So I think I'm just kind of picking up on more things in year 2 as far as like what's probably on their radar. It should probably be on my radar. because I think that's what good assistants do. Trying to take a lot off of her plate. So now that I kind of know the way we do things, I can help our operations. I can help our other assistants just like, hey, doesn't even have to get to the end of the hall. Let's do this. We'll be good. And then, invest in our players more. I think, just being year two, I'm not the new coach anymore. We have a lot of returners, the relationships, the foundation is there. So it's been really cool just to be able to invest in them. Like it's not a figuring out who each other is on a surface level. Now we can go a little deeper and just kind of help them personally more.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So back when we started talking about kind of the prepping and the planning, I hadn't intended to do this, but we actually did a masterclass about 2 months ago, and that's available on CoachTube. And I thought you did a fantastic job, like laying out kind of how you go about thinking, installing, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the type of offense that Coach Cascio ran in high school and then they're running now. It's really anything, I feel like, for coaching the way that most coaches now are starting to kind of think about the game and what they want their players to learn about and that kind of thing. Any highlights with that? You're starting to post some things I saw on social media as well, so probably people have seen some clips of that. But
yeah, I think you brought up a good point of like it doesn't have to be for a certain system. I think what like really makes me tick is like just doing things like as well as we possibly can.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's like laying out our off-season program, like I work with coaches with the consulting, and a lot of the conversations lately have been, this is what my state regulations are, these are kind of the constraints and rules I have. And it's different, across the board. But I always look at it as like, what can we do versus what can't we do? And whatever we can do, let's do better than everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Let's be more efficient. Let's plan. I think having a plan, even if it's a bad one, sets you up to get something done, because at the end of the day, if you don't have a plan, it's like, let's just play pickup or, whatever. So with the thing that the masterclass that we did, I love that one, man, because it had a lot to do with practice, where we all have the same amount of practice time. Like right now, every Division I program has 8 hours. September 26th, we're all going to have 20 hours. How can we do that the best we've ever done it? Because there always is a better way. I think as a coach, that's really what makes me tick, and that's why I continue to change and I don't want to say change, but maybe innovate or tweak, come up with new ideas. It's because I know the way I'm doing it right now, in 3, 4, 5 years, I'm going to look back and be like, man, that's a good thing, because that means you're growing and changing. So I think that's what really makes me tick as a head coach.
Yeah. Can you go ahead and tell people about the consulting and then where they can find out about that or connect with you on social?
Sure. I think a lot of coaches come for offensive stuff. That's kind of what I hate to say even been labeled. It's just kind of has been my wheelhouse, but I equally care about defense, and I'm huge on skill development. And I've just kind of refined what we do, how we do it, and I've made it better on the floor, off the floor. So I think coaches end up getting a lot more than what they probably think the courtside consulting program is about. I help coaches in a lot of ways. So a lot of archived practices, game film, webinars, clinics, but also just like a shared Google Doc between you and I. And you just go in there and you type out 10 questions, and I'll go in there and give feedback, drop links, drop diagrams, pictures. One-on-one calls with coaches is usually one of the highlights of my day. Just talking with coaches, building relationships with them, and getting to know them and their programs and seeing them kind of move the needle. That's been great. So really it's everything. It's anything that you want it to be. If you just want the stuff, you've got it. Like I just put together like an 80-page manual on offense, which I've never done before. I did a 70-page one on defense. So I've never had anything like put together like that. And that's got like descriptions, diagrams, videos. It's kind of like the one-stop shop. But I think the The most value is exactly what we were just talking about. It's the execution in it. So real quick, I know we're wrapping up here, but I'm getting a dog this weekend. And so I've been watching YouTube videos on how to train a dog. And it's so like this just keeps resonating with me. And I think it's good for coaches. So they talk about doing drills with the dog. And the drills are going to look pretty good inside. And then you get them outside where there's more variables. There's noises, there's movement. It's not going to transfer. And I'm like, okay, well, that's like block practice to game. Okay, that you're speaking my language. And then the trainer is saying like, well, look, I'm going to, pay him is what they call when they give him like a little treat. I'm going to, even though he didn't do it perfect, I'm going to pay him because he did this. And it's like that art of coaching, is like, well, that wasn't exact. Like, this is the feedback I can give right now, or this is the drill that we can do with this constraint, because I know what it's going to look like before we even go to practice. And I know what the benefit of that is going to be. So it's crazy, man. The parallels between training a dog and training a basketball team. It's pretty cool as a coach just to look at that.
They didn't suggest adding a defender. That's always a solution for basketball.
That's right.
Add a defender. So hopefully you guys work together better than that. So yeah, you do a fantastic job with especially I haven't one of, if not the best, as far as like tagging, librarying, video, and just having those types of resources were especially helpful for me to be able to see the concepts and then have them applied. But I think that probably this is where a lot of coaches miss it, is it's just that gathering of knowledge and seeing how to do it. But I have most benefited with meeting with guys like you and some of the others that we've had on the show, but like interacting and really hearing how they do it, asking the questions, getting the feedback. And that's, I think we're probably most coaches who invest in something like this see the most return is in that rather than just the resources that are available through the people themselves. So, absolutely. And they can find that at
coachcassio.com, Mark Cascio at Gmail, and at Coach Cascio on Twitter.
That's Coach Mark Cascio of App State women's basketball team. Always a pleasure, Coach. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Appreciate it.